So welcome to our Institute for Teaching LGBTQ History, and here's Eric Adamian.
Hello, everybody. We are here with our student panel on day 3 of our Summer Institute for Teachers for Teaching LGBTQ History. I'm honored to be in the presence of our wonderful You Speak Radio participants from this year, Thea, Gabriel, and Dean, to have some really good conversations on LGBTQ history instruction in K-12 schools and their personal experiences in what is working for them, what could be better, and hopefully they can also share a little bit about the You Speak Radio program that they're a part of right now. So let's get started with maybe introductions. If you could share your name, grade level, pronouns, and answer the question, what was the first time that you were exposed to LGBTQ history and where did you learn about it? So we can start with, I guess I'll open it up. Who wants to go first? All right.
I'll go. So I'm Dean. I graduated, so I guess I'm a college freshman, going into a college freshman, so yay. That's my grade level. I use any pronouns. I don't really care. Just he, him, they, them, she, her, whatever. And my first exposure to LGBTQ history, I would probably have to say would be from the internet. Definitely not at school. I'm from Memphis, Tennessee, so that is not even really brought up.
Thank you, Dean. Thea or Gabriel?
I can go. Hi, my name is Gabriel. I'm a rising senior. My pronouns are they, them. And I would have to agree, my first time like learning about LGBTQ history was probably from like when I was figuring out my sexuality. I would like follow a bunch of like queer Instagram accounts just to feel like I had some sort of community, and I like absorbed some history there.
Amazing. And Thea?
Hi, my name's Taya. My pronouns are they, them. I'm going to be a junior. And the first time I ever learned about LGBTQ history was, I'm a bit of a nerd. And so when I started like questioning my gender and sexuality, I just dove down internet researching rabbit holes, and it was never from school. It always just came from me being curious and loving history and wanting to know the stories of people who came before me.
Right, and that's such a powerful tool. I mean, as we just saw, all 3 of you have learned about LGBTQ history and whatnot through the internet and not at school for the first time. But I was wondering, have you learned about LGBT? I mean, Dean, you kind of answered this, but have you learned about LGBTQ topics through your classrooms for those of you that may have? And if so, what topics? Should I just not bother and skip to the next question?
Okay, I can go. I mean, the only real time that LGBT people were brought up in my classroom, I go, just for context reasons, I go to a small-ish private school, which is considered one of the more accepting ones. Like I can look like this and go to school, wear makeup, just express like, everything. But it's not necessarily taught in the classroom. It stops at a certain point. And so the only real queer history or LGBTQ history is when we were learning about the Holocaust, and that the inclusion of LGBTQ people in that. That's the only
Wait, they actually did that for you?
Well, I mean, yeah, it was just a part of like, it wasn't like a whole lesson about just the pink triangle and like LGBT people.
We never learned that.
All of that, but like that was kind of included in like a half lesson. Other than that, most of the LGBTQ history I've learned on my own and like sought out and talked to people and just absorbed from there.
Thank you for sharing. Thea, you were mentioning something about that this wasn't the case for you.
Oh, no, definitely.
Yeah. Was there an instance that you learned about LGBTQ history in your classroom?
no, we don't really. The only thing I can remember was I had a computer science class where our teacher casually mentioned Alan Turing once.
Mhm.
And I mean, we had our sex ed classes, which were basically, and some people are gay, don't get AIDS. And then a there was a biology teacher that we had that casually mentioned, oh yeah, and these fish can like change their biological sex. Fun. And that is all I have ever learned about LGBTQ people in class. The only other times that it's ever been brought up is because I am loud and annoying and I make myself a problem in class and bring things up because I think the rest of the class should know it. But otherwise, like I go to I go to a public school that's like pretty progressive and everyone is very accepting, but even still, nothing gets brought up unless I choose to bring it up myself.
Mhm. Thank you for sharing that, Taya. And I should say that from my personal experience also, when I was growing up, pretty much the only narrative that I heard from my family and from school was that you're gay, don't get AIDS. Basically, that's what it was, if we're putting it frankly. And I just wanted to reaffirm that you being loud about all of these topics is just you affirming your identities, and more power to you. And we're here to support you. Be even louder and annoy people.
I had a very similar experience. I'm pretty lucky. I go to an art school, and something about the arts, there's just a lot of queer people in it. And so I have a teacher who was also queer, and he led the GSA, and he was a history teacher, and he would kind of try to include queer history, but he because of the curriculum and because of it was like an AP class and it was world history, it was very difficult for him to be able to add anything. And I think that's kind of indicative of how much there, not how much queer history there is, but how much room there is for it in the current curriculum.
Right.
I mean, it almost
Right.
seems purposeful, like that there is no time at all for any queer history. I mean, much less it's ever brought up. I mean, I remembered also another thing, world history, the AIDS crisis, that was it. So those two things. Yeah.
Wait,
Like, yeah,
you
people
got
were
taught about
gay.
the AIDS crisis?
Well, it was AP World. So they were like, this is the AIDS crisis.
They
This is
didn't
what
bring it up in
happened.
our AP World class.
Oh,
It was like 2 chapters of the textbook at the very end of the textbook, and it didn't really bring up gay people at all.
you know, it just, it didn't, yeah. They said stuff like there were gay people here and LGBTQ people here, but here was this, epidemic. Let's move
Oh,
on. Like it,
the only thing we didn't
yeah.
have a class discussion about it, except for the fact that I was constantly bringing it up in like the chats for the Google Meet and stuff. But the only thing we actually learned was it was these 2 chapters at the end of a textbook that basically said AIDS was a thing once upon a time, and now it's fine because you don't die of it anymore.
Wow. So one thing that I wanted to kind of address here is some of you said that you mentioned LGBTQ topics in your classroom sometimes. So I'm wondering what the response has been. In other words, how do the teachers react when you bring up something having to do LGBTQ history or LGBTQ just identities and inclusion? And we can take turns to answer this. Who wants to go first?
This kind of relates to one of the later questions, but me and another, it was in my health class in my freshman year. Me and this other queer girl, we, after, like, the sex ed unit was already really small in our health class, and we kind of went up to the teacher and we were like, hey, I don't feel like any of this is important to me. And I don't really feel like am being supported. And he was like, well, we're talking about contraception. We're not talking about general sex health and positivity. And it's like inherently, even for straight people, that's a problem. But that's like talking about contraception is not an excuse for not talking about queer sex. And I mean, it wasn't his fault because, you know, he didn't create the curriculum, but I didn't feel very supported in that moment on all levels.
Absolutely.
I got abstinence plus, which, you know, the name kind of is indicative of what it is. Did not include not a mention anyway, not even a mention of LGBT people. I didn't teach myself. Planned Parenthood had a queer sex ed thing through Planned Parenthood plus Out Memphis. They did a thing. And so they had queer sex ed and I went. So I did that. But it was outside. But to answer your question, Eric, the teachers basically kind of step back and let whatever conversation is happening in the classroom happen. There's a rule for the faculty at our school that like the faculty can't express their political opinions. And some teachers see, I guess the extension of that is they're going to step back and not really say anything because they don't want to bring up political opinions, which queer existence, not necessarily a political opinion, which is already an issue to begin with. But they step back and let it happen, which usually it's like half room or 3/4 room of like not understanding straight people. And then there's few understanding people, but other than that, that's how it usually goes.
Yeah, it's like not even a political, it's not an opinion, queer existence.
It's really not, which is just so strange. Like,
right.
I don't get the correlation, but you know, that it happens, I guess.
Yeah.
Kind of relating to what you were saying about finding places to learn it outside of school. It's kind of not a place that you would expect, but I actually got some really great sex education at my church. I go to like an Episcopalian church, which is pretty a good amount more accepting, and so there's this program called OWL, which stands for Our Whole Lives, and it's they taught us about like more than contraception, also like about consent, and they talked about like I don't know how I don't know what type, like how explicit, but like they talked about like other forms of safe sex that didn't just relate to straight sex, which was it was great because we also got to like ask questions and have it be anonymous, and it was Our Whole Lives, if anyone needed to check that.
That's wonderful.
I mean, about the teacher thing, I've so far had very supportive teachers who are like not just willing to let me talk, but they're like interested in it and they tend to encourage it. But also another thing that works really well for me is I am friends with like half the admin. So if any problems end up happening, I know like all of the counseling staff and the assistant principals, and I can generally get stuff reported pretty well, and they're willing to help me out there. So that's very helpful when if like anything goes wrong, it's good to know that I have someone I can talk to who has some form of power to tell the teachers that they need to cut it out.
So Taya, from what you're saying, what I'm hearing is that there's some sort of a relationship building with like teachers, perhaps, and admin folks.
Yeah.
That has helped you in that process.
Yeah.
And so how did you learn about this process of like reporting, for example, if something is going right?
Well, I've always been taught like kind of throughout my life that if someone like does something that is like inappropriate or wrong, you have to report it to someone. But over like the past couple of years, I've gotten very involved with my GSA. I'm the president of it right now, and in trying to make changes at the school, I've gotten to know a lot of the teachers and administrators. So they all know who I am. And they've all either like helped me out or said they support me. And if they don't, like, I know who to go to and I know who to reach out to when I have a problem. And but that really came from I had to reach out to make those connections and to kind of make sure I knew where to go. And I've been having to teach a lot of the kids in my GSA, okay, when this teacher says these things, when this teacher misgenders you, here's the person you go to, here's who you talk to, here's how you do it. And they haven't been taught that yet.
Right. And I have a question for Dina and Gabriel, but before we get to that, Thea, I'm just wondering, this knowledge base of kind of like, this isn't okay to say about gender, or this is how we should be treated and all of that. Where did you learn about all of this? Was it like family, church, school, independent research, or?
It's a mix of research and reaching out to like the other kids at my schools and like kind of just talking amongst ourselves and like really trying to understand each other's experiences. Mm-hmm. And we all kind of bring the information that we've come across together. And then from there, we've been trying to do a lot of education with the teachers at our school and giving them presentations to pass that on to make sure they know like how to ask for a student's pronouns without outing them and stuff like that, and things you should and should not say to the kids in your class. But it's a lot of both looking stuff up online and just talking to people.
So a lot of what I'm hearing is a lot of basically labor on your end of having to not only educate your peers, but also educate the people who are in charge of the school and people who are teaching you.
Yes.
So I just want to take a moment to applaud you for doing all of that. And in an ideal situation, we wouldn't have that.
Yeah.
You know,
but no one else is doing it, so someone's got to do the work.
Exactly. So for Dean and Gabriel specifically, because you talked about not having ideal scenarios happen when you were talking about LGBTQ stuff or bringing it up in school. So I'm wondering, what would have helped in that situation? What could the teachers have done, or the admin folks could have done, that would have made you feel supported and safe?
I think it's mostly just setting, I mean, when we go into a space, we're going to set norms, community norms. When I work, because our school doesn't have a GSA, we're really small. So all of the diversity clubs we're in one. So it's one diversity club. So it's a diversity alliance, which is, we all work together for a common thing. We've made it into a thing that's very good. And I like where it's headed. Not that we shouldn't have our own organizations, but there just aren't enough like queer people at my school. I, for a long time, was the only queer person who was like out and existing. But I guess the ideal response would be setting community norms and, be a part to a certain extent of a conversation, to moderate, to, say that, if there's something problematic and harmful that is said, stepping in and correcting. I work with kids, and like that is what you do when a kid does something, is you step in, correct, and like, take steps from there. But usually at that, I mean, there's no action. It's just sitting aside and letting, the people who are getting, and not necessarily confronted, but like this, it's coming at, deal with it, which, I mean, you're there and this is a classroom discussion. It doesn't really make sense for those not to already exist.
Right, and it's a matter of, you know, if any other sort of conflict arises in the classroom, you would step in and deal with that. Then how come this is an exception, you know? So thank you for sharing that, Gabriel.
I honestly kind of wish I had an answer, but I haven't. I mean, in the situation with my health class, I don't really know what he could have done. I mean, I do know that teachers, to be, I've never been a teacher. I don't know how much power they have over the curriculum, but it would have been one of the things that has in the past helped me is um, I went back to school at the end of last semester, like back in person for like a few weeks. And after class, one of the teachers came, like while I was packing up, and like one on one apologized because he had, like, I don't want to say messed up. That sounds kind of strong, but he had like messed up on my pronouns, and it felt very affirming to not have it be like a big thing where in front of everyone he's like, "Oh my God, I am so sorry," but to have it be in person, like personal, was kind of a reminder that there are people who are trying, even if they don't have a whole lot of ability to do more. So I guess personal things with queer youth are kind of great ways to make sure that they know they're supported on at least personal levels.
Right, like having that sort of personal touch of just checking in with students and making sure that they are feeling okay in a private kind of a way. Because as we know, you know, identity, especially having to do with sexuality and gender, are very intimate topics to talk about, and they're very vulnerable topics to talk about. So definitely creating that personal space. And thank you for sharing that, Gabriel. Taya, I know you said that I mean, you've shared about a lot of what you do, but do you have any insights also to add to what could teachers do better? What additional things that they can do to support a situation or to respond to a situation that would actually make you feel more supported and safe?
Um, I mean, one thing, like, just in general, like announcing stuff in front of the class is not comfortable for anyone. If someone's like bullying another student or saying a bunch of stuff that they shouldn't be, it's best if you pull them aside and talk to them then. Um, Otherwise, I think the best way to handle it is to kind of create an environment where everyone knows that it's not acceptable to start with. And that comes from really just talking about like queer people in maybe your lessons or just kind of casually, so it's not this weird thing you have to be quiet about. Like there are even, we've been trying to encourage at our school, like math teachers who will casually just throw they them pronouns into a word problem, or like just little things like that that make it so that everyone in the room knows this is normal. We're all fine with it. And we're going to look at you weird if you're not fine with it.
Mhm, mhm. Yeah, thank you for sharing that. And that's you know, just the subtle nuances in conversation and small things that you share about queer folks and their identities, of course. But you also talked about including queer folks in curriculum here and there, which is a perfect segue to the next question that I wanted to ask you all. So I know you've shared kind of about the climate, the school climate that you all are in, having to do with LGBTQ inclusion. But I'm wondering, what would ideal LGBTQ history education look like to you? And you can go as wild as you want with this. So,
Yeah, I can go. I mean, honestly, I do not think that having a separate class that is an elective, I know that would be like LGBT history. They do that with African American history, and in some places they do like Hispanic American history, things like that. I think that is kind of it doesn't really teach everybody. Everybody needs a baseline education of African American history because that is American history, LGBTQ history because that is also American history. I mean, and like I can go on and on. Those need to be incorporated across the board into classrooms and on different levels. I mean, you can start earlier in incorporating that education. And what I really wish is they kind of don't not just start from the queer liberation movement, but start earlier to indicate that we've always been here. And that is a common misconception that even older people, younger people that it just popped up out of somewhere. It's we have been around. Queer people have been around for centuries and have existed in different spaces. Yes, we might not have been as visible because we would have faced death, but yeah. And I think a complete history that is not centered around just a white perspective, but because centering it around the full LGBTQ perspective, including, I think for the most part, because trans people are so visible and face the most harm, teaching about like trans women, trans men, non-binary people throughout history, because to normalize that, which can have a direct effect in the response to trans people existing, and that can start to curb the violence that we face, that trans people like me face every single day. Yeah.
Thank you.
I have a couple. I think that was like such a great that was said so well. And I think like in history class, one of the things that's like why history is so important is because it's like we need to make sure it's not repeated. And I agree. And then at the same time, so much of the things we're learning about are like this war between two white countries, and then this war between two white countries, and then this other war between two white countries. And it's like that's not the kind of thing that's affecting us. That's not the kind of thing that's affecting BIPOC people, queer people. It's like we need to learn about, especially in American history, like not just the way it was founded, but like who was essentially hurt for it to be founded. Like there needs to be so much more, like Dean was saying, like real other perspectives besides like the cishet white man's. And I think also, kind of like Teo was saying, it needs to expand beyond history class, because if you see your pronouns in a math problem, you know that you're not just sequestered to this part of history or this this specific story. And like in English class, if we were to read about if we were to read stories that focused on queer people, it's like it's about destigmatization as well as knowledge. And I think it can even expand beyond the classroom. Like I on Saturday I watched Luca, the new Pixar movie, and it was not explicitly queer, but the way it was written was so like metatextually, it was the same amount of romance that you might get from something like Wally. And I think there's such a sexualization of queerness that it's not often expanded um, to young media, to young people. And so something like, I mean, Luca isn't the best example. I just really love that movie because it's not explicit, but things beyond the classroom that show that queer people are not so much normal, because I don't want to say that we're just like we're straight but we're gay. It's we are yeah, I don't know what the right word is, but we exist in a way that is special and still normal.
Okay.
Yeah.
Right. Right.
I,
That was
I
that's
especially love the idea of like this going beyond just like history, because I personally would take many LGBTQ history classes for funsies. But I remember I was talking to one of my friends and he was kind of wondering whether or not he should take like a computer science class, and he was a bit unsure about it because like it's not a space he was like really comfortable being in. And so I was telling him about my experience in a computer science class that I took. And I was like, well, one part that I really enjoyed was, I mean, it was a good bit on my own, but I spent a lot of time researching Alan Turing. So then I went on and I like told him about all of this like history of queer people in computer science. And he was like, maybe I should take the class. Like this sounds like a lot of fun. This sounds like a space that I belong in. And I think the ability to do that with whatever subject you come across, to be able to give permission to kids to have them be able to say, I belong in this space, that means a lot. Um, so whatever subject you're teaching, just even if you think it's not fully important to like whatever test they need to take at the end of the class or whatever, just the ability for a kid to say, I belong in this space is really encouraging and it means a lot.
yeah. And that teach things that are reflective of who we are as a community, as all of you pointed out. So I'm just out of curiosity, have you done any assignments where you've incorporated queer people or topics on your, like just because you wanted to and because just because you wanted to? And if you'd be willing to share about any of that.
I for our like end of the semester project for our AP World class, we basically created a DBQ question from scratch, and I did mine on like queer history, and I actually have it posted on my GSA classrooms, and I share it with all the history teachers at school and say like, hey, here's a resource that I made with a bunch of my classmates. Use it, give it to people. Like this is now a resource and material that you can use in your classroom. But I had so much fun researching that.
What do you mind sharing with us what the DBQ question was?
I'm not sure, but it was something about like you have to argue whether or not the treatment of queer people has like changed in recent years.
Oh wow, okay.
So you have to say like whether or not stuff has gotten better based on the documents. And I personally think it's very interesting.
Yeah.
Because there's like bits and pieces from history in there, and then there's some like modern news and stuff, so you can compare and contrast what has changed and what hasn't.
That's amazing. We pulled out all the receipts for that, didn't you? Gabriel, would you like to go next? If you've done an assignment like that?
Oh yeah. It's usually for. Well, I study writing at the art school that I go to, like creative writing, and I actually got to take an LGBTQ literature class, so that was really that was cool. Um, book recommendation. We read this book called We the Animals, and it's written in first person plural for most of it. So in like we and us, and it's really good. But for a lot of my assignments in in all of my creative writing classes, and actually in my history class Okay, in my creative writing classes, I write a lot of about like queer characters because it comes from my own personal experience. And recently in my um, uh, history, my U.S. history class, we had to do a piece, like an essay, like the final was about resistance or some kind of uprising throughout U.S. history, some kind of like protest of some kind. Uh, I, in a sense, and mine was about the history of gay marriage or same-sex marriage, and so he was very supportive. That was actually the teacher that came and apologized for using the incorrect pronouns personally, and so he was very supportive and like connected me to another person who was doing a similar topic, and so that was a good experience.
Wonderful. And Dean?
Um, I think I have done projects in the past and they've gone well. I mostly just steer the ship and take it where I want to go. But I will talk about mainly the kind of diversity outreach work that I do at my school of creating, seminars and stuff like that. I said that it's all kind of in one club, so we all have to incorporate our own things. We all work together for a kind of same mission of, more recognition of diversity in our school and stuff like that. And I have, really just advocated and incorporated into those sessions where we take, X amount of people from this kind of study hall time, and it's rotating each thing for the schedule. And like I have created like activities and stuff and, incorporated LGBTQ history primarily about the queer liberation front and queer liberation movement, places like STAR. It was started by Sylvia Rivera and Marsha P. Johnson, and kind of continuations of that impact in kind of, the issue that has become and throughout history that's largely ignored is queer homelessness and stuff like that. So those are a few things that I've touched on, but I think it's more about advocacy. And, that advocacy doesn't just kind of stop at the school. It doesn't just stay in the school doors. It extends out into the world. And I think that is a good natural extension, that when we introduce those things into the classroom, you create more activists, you create more advocates, you create more people who, want to change things about the world, but to change things, they need to know about it first.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Thank you. Oh my gosh, that's so amazing. And Dean, out of curiosity, how do you do your research? Like, do you have any recommendations on resources that people can look into?
Yes, there is, I do not remember the name of it, but I'm gonna Google it. There's like a big kind of book of queer history. But I think most of it, has come primarily from sourcing around. Nothing is just from one certain place because nothing is really compact enough to contain queer history. And since our history has been continually, like, I guess, suppressed until now, at least, where it's more accessible. It wasn't even really super accessible on the internet until recently. But I think I'm on the internet a lot. Like, yeah. And, when you have things that you're interested in, they pop up and
Right.
you go into rabbit holes and podcasts that you listen to. There's queer history podcasts that have amazing. So I'll share those.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. And you all have worked on some amazing queer history related projects and queer literature and advocacy and everything. And I just wanted to mention to everybody in attendance here too that the 3 students that we're talking to right now are also part of One Archives Foundation's You Speak Radio program, which seeks to connect. It's an intergenerational project that connects LGBTQ youth with LGBTQ trailblazers, and they get to conduct interviews with them and make essentially oral history bits that are going to be shared on our website, and we're going to have a listening party later in July. So I was wondering if any of you or all of you could just share a little bit about your experience of being a part of the program and getting to conduct your interviews. Whoever wants to go first, take it away.
I can go first. So I mean, what when I was like thinking about my answers to these questions, one of the first things that came up was that one of my first real comprehensive where it felt like I was being taught queer history was with this project, which was kind of like, how can I? There has to be something, and I just realized that there wasn't something where I felt like I was being taught, and I didn't have to go out and find it and like the community for myself. And I got to interview Karina Samala, who is a trans woman, and she like as a trans femme person, being able to interview her was very interesting from an interview perspective, but just being able to see a trans femme person happy and able to do things was like, I was thinking about it for so long after the interview because I was like, it's so much of media and news that you see is like about like mortality rates or like stuff like that, and being able to see her happy and like beautiful was so inspiring and important for me because there's like I'm thinking of like political cartoons or stuff like that where you see trans people, especially trans women, portrayed as just so like like purposely so ugly, and it feels it's an invalidation of identity that kind of really like affects all trans people, and it yeah, so it was just so nice to be able to see her happy and so inspiring.
Thank you, Gabriel. And she really loved speaking with you too. Taya?
I mean, it's been really, really amazing so far. I love like radio and podcasts. I've been kind of obsessed with it all my life. Like it's kind of just, I am an absolute nerd and I love it so much. And speaking with Bamboo was amazing because I got to really like, one thing about being a queer youth is you really don't see anyone like you around. And through this project, I've actually met like trans people who aren't other kids, which is incredible because, I mean, as much as it's great to have each other, it's kind of lonely at times.
Mhm.
But to know that there are people who have been fighting for you longer than you've been alive is it's incredible. And it's,
Thank you for sharing.
it's amazing.
And Dean?
I had the privilege of talking to Roland Valencia, and just my conversation with him about all of the continuous work that he's done was just, I think, more than anything, affirming and assuring. Assuring that I know what I carry with me of, my activist nature, I guess. I don't know if that's the right like verbiage, but whatever. That can continue and can grow and can be incorporated into almost every single avenue of my life, which I've kind of already done, honestly. And then it's just, assuring that like we do not see a lot of queer elders. I mean, like the extent of queer elders that I've met in person or just met, period, kind of extends to, I don't know, not that old, but like millennial age, which is not an elder. I'm not calling you guys old, sorry. But like seeing and talking to like actual queer community elders that have been through all of these things that we learn is just because there's a disconnect. There's a gigantic disconnect. Yeah, I mean, obviously we all know why, because of the AIDS crisis, but like that took away a gigantic, huge chunk of, you know, a community to pass on that knowledge, where we feel like we are picking that back up, taking that and moving along with it, because it was kind of, you know, halted. I mean, to a certain extent. And to see that, you know, kind of materialize right in front of me in a conversation was amazing.
Thank you. Thank you all for sharing. And I should say that all of the folks that you interviewed, Karina Samala, Bambi Salcedo, and Roland Palencia, have had wonderful things to say about the interviews. And we're very excited for the listening party. And absolutely, the point of this project was to just kind of bridge that intergenerational gap. And it's wild when you see history in action in front of you, kind of. So thank you for sharing about your experience. So I have one final question that, you know, just you all have touched upon this already, but just as any final thoughts or any message that you want to bring to this wonderful group of teachers that we have among us today, who are learning more about LGBTQ history and want to bring this to their classrooms. I was just wondering, what would make you feel safe and supported in schools when it comes to LGBTQ inclusion and safety? Now, it could be curriculum, or it could be just general school climate, anything that you want to share about that. And let's start with Gabriel, maybe.
Yeah, at my school, I'm really glad that this is becoming more mainstream. Or like a lot of people are doing it. So like we at the start of every like when you come into the class, part of icebreakers is like doing your pronouns, and to an like that is helpful to a lot of people, and also to an extent, like I figured out or kind of came to terms with the fact that I was non-binary and wanted to use they them pronouns partway through my sophomore year, and I just kind of figured that it was more simple and less complicated, to just wait to be able to like openly change my pronouns for a lot of people, like teachers and students that I wasn't close with. And I think one of the things that people can do is have some sort of system in place, or be some way of openness that shows that at any time it can be easy and personal to change your pronouns, with teachers, with administration, on your I don't know, record. I don't know how school works, but that's something that is a good step and can also be taken further. And then I also think that just in general, even if you don't end up going to GSA, because I don't think I've gone since maybe like my sophomore year, just having the option of a GSA shows that there is that there is a place for acceptance. And yeah, I guess, I mean, I don't know how to change curriculums, but curriculum changes in all classrooms is, I think, very important. Especially like going back to what Dean said, like not not a different class. Like I think that's a very important distinction. Like making sure that it's integrated into all parts of your education.
Thank you. Dean?
Yes, I definitely think that, I mean, just the basics of creating school-wide, classroom, just norms. I think we often kind of want to lean towards comfortability, but for a lot of people, things like queerness are already verging into an uncomfortable thing, which is, but whatever. I think it starts by saying outright that like this is a place of acceptance for queer people, and ignorance is not necessarily like asking questions is encouraged, but outright ignorance and bigotry is not accepted. I think those two often get diverged. But I think it kind of starts across from political action and climate. I mean, political action in my state, there are several laws that are banning the inclusion of queer history or mentions of queer people at all in any curriculum in Tennessee. Things like that basically make it impossible to have us exist. Trans people are now, I guess it's going to be signed into law, that businesses have to say outright and have a sign of if they serve trans people or not, and warnings and things like that. So those things, I think across the board, it starts mainly about community, and that is honestly bigger than any one person can kind of do, but it is kind of just saying that it starts across the board from our representatives and paying attention to politics, and it plays a big role. I mean, it might not feel like it, but it does. So yeah.
Thank you.
I personally think, I mean, I might be a bit biased since I'm kind of in charge of my school's GSA, but really what you need to do if you want to figure out what's going on at your school and what problems your students are having, you need to listen to them and you need to create a space where they can complain about everything that's going wrong. So I usually try to make my GSA very much a political, we're a group that we have designated time and space for complaining about what's going wrong. And so we have kids who will show up and be like, hey, this one teacher is a problem right now, or there's not enough gender neutral bathrooms at our school and I'm having trouble with it, or like, I feel really uncomfortable in this class, or I'm doing sports and this is making me uncomfortable. But you don't know that those problems are happening until you actually talk to the students who are experiencing it. So if you create that space where you can listen, you will figure out everything that's going on at your school that needs change.
Thank you. Thank you to all three of you. I just want to take a moment to really thank you for showing up to this panel today and for sharing about your experiences. I know it can be difficult and vulnerable to talk about all of the things that we talked about today. So really from the bottom of my heart and on behalf of everybody here, thank you for showing up. We have, oh, did we lose Dean? I hope they're gonna jump back on. We have like maybe 5 more minutes left. If anybody has any questions, please put them in the chat and we can ask the amazing panel of students here.
I would like to say something.
Yeah.
I want to cry. They're so amazing, these children. Thank you for educating those of us who are getting older. I just want to say, T, that sometimes teachers try to do something good and it turns out to do something bad. Like when you said, don't single out a student and sit in the front of the class. I've been teaching for 22 years and I thought that was what I was supposed to do all this time. And you said, no, don't do that because it causes more harm. I'm sorry, I'm just emotional, but I'm just
No.
very grateful that you guys are, here we go, that you beautiful people are here to remind us that we can do better, that we can create a safe space from the beginning, which is exactly what I'm going to do this year. And that's why I'm here, because I didn't want to just teach that lesson on the Holocaust and the LGBT community. I wanted to become organic. I wanted to be part of a daily practice. So I thank you. You guys are awesome.
Thank you so much. It means a lot. And I'm sure it means a lot to the kids in your class that just knowing they have an adult who is willing to support them and stand up for them, it's incredible. And it's very valuable. Thank you so much.
Amazing. Thank you. All right. So it's 11:59 right now, and it's time